The African beliefs. If the plateau teaches attention and the slope teaches purification, Africa often teaches relation. The dead remain socially present for ancestors. Thresholds live in rivers and groves, and the world's spirits are woven into daily obligation. Ancestors hold memory. Orders and forests mark passage, and rites keep the household world in order. Gates and thresholds, rivers, groves, and the place where names cross the water. A palm cupped, round cool liquids, a name spoken into the stream, a tiny splash that answers like an echo. This is where many African worlds begin their conversation with the dead. If you have followed the grim journey so far, you know the pattern. Some cultures build gates and ledgers, others teach washing and attention. Here, the lesson is relational and topographical. Thresholds are not an architecture arc, but a place. Riverbend, grove hollow, or stone beneath a house tree, where the living and the dead meet by practice, not proclamation. Across West, Central, and parts of Southern Africa, rivers and forests are liminal technologies. They are places where the human and more than human intertwine, where libation poured becomes an argument, a play, and a fact. Pouring libation is tiny law. The cup tilted, the voice that names a parent, an ancestor, a founder. These acts do juridical work. They mark debt repaid, promise renewed, claim remembered. The water takes the name returns in a ripple, and with that simple exchange, a relation is maintained. There is no cosmic receipt handed back, only a social effect. Memory kept, obligations acknowledged. Now, sacred groves are the other great thresholds. Walk into a grove at dusk, and you feel the air change. Leaves hush the village noise, the path narrows, the light becomes chapel lights. These are ancestral domains, places where stalls are set, where carved figures or stones indicate residence. In many communities, the grove is a domestic court. Consults met here. Rites are performed, wrongs are named aloud. It is a place where ancestry is not abstraction, but habitation. In a grove, you do not petition a distant judge. You remind the ancestors of their names and what they once vowed for, the tribe. Household thresholds are equally decisive. Across the continent, the altars, the ancestral stool, the calabash that holds food for the dead, these are the household's gates. The dead are not somewhere else in a purely metaphysical sense. They are incorporated into daily domestic practice. A child's name is dipped into libation at a naming rite, a meal set out on the ancestor's stool at each commemorative day. A prayer is muttered when a chair is cleaned. This ordinary choreography is the infrastructure of continuity. The household, not a single temple, often holds the primary portal. Water spirits and river mothers complicate the geography. They are not merely obstacles or resources, but person one must negotiate with. Mummy Wata and her region variants, ambivalent presences, wondrous, erotic, dangerous. They take offerings, they claim children, they crown prosperity, they demand respect. A libation at a riverbank can be a greeting to an ancestor and, simultaneously, a bribe to a potent spirit to keep the fishing tides, kind to the family. Naming rites are where threshold practice tightens into personal destiny. A child's naming, when performed at a proper altar or in certain trees, does more than pick a label. It ties the newborn into a lineage, gives them an interlocutor among the ancestors, and sets obligations that will be recalled at libation. The rite is not ceremonial vanity. It is the means by which souls are socialized into a living network that will, in due time, remember their debts and repay it. The role of specialists is practical and particular. Priests, diviners, masked dancers, elder councils, they are the mediators and the technicians. Diviner, Ifa, or its cognates, cast kola, or palm nuts, and reads a grammar of the person's passage. A masked Egungun dancer becomes ancestral presence, incarnate for the rite. An elder supervises the precise order of libation. These are not mythic extras. They are the people who translate desire into ritual leather. Importantly, thresholds are social remedies as much as metaphysical facts. If an outrage happens, a broken taboo, an unavenged murder, neglected funeral, the symptoms show up as misfortune, failed crops, illness, a river running low. The language people use is not a legal citation, but cause and relation. Ancestors are displeased. The river spirit withdraws favor. Ritual repair, confession, libation, sacrifice, reburial functions to restore relation, to rebalance obligations. The living do not wait for an omniscient tribunal to correct matters. They enact correction to place where relations are held. This is why performances, festivals, masked dances, and public rites matter so dramatically. An Egungun procession in Yoruba country is not a mere theater. It is a public audit. The masked forms bring ancestors into town, remind people of their lineage's ethics, and sometimes enforce reconciliation through spectacle. Shame is publicly processed so that private grudges do not calcify into communal danger. There is a theological delicacy here worth naming. You see, ancestors are not always moralizers. In the sense of punitive gods, they are corporate people, family members who maintain lineage memory. Their displeasure has social effect because communities are interdependent. Similarly, spirits of rivers and forests have agency because humans have made pacts with the non-human world. These pacts sustain livelihoods. So, if you prefer cosmic bureaucracy, well, if you prefer kin who will scold you at the next libation, this system has you covered. It keeps obligations immediate. It is, in its way, remarkably transit and psychopomps, hands that guide, masks that leads, and the river that remembers. There's no single ferryman with a ledger. There are hands that guide, masks that lead, and waters that remember names. And that distribution is the point. Passage is not an administrative form, but a social choreography the living perform so the dead may find the right place. You see, in Yoruba houses, the Ifa diviner casts palm kernels or kola and reads a grammar of destiny. In Benin or Ghana, a priest may chant the lineage and call the ancestor by the exact name the family remembers. These are not ornamental acts. They are technical. The proper formula, the right invocation, the repeated name are tools that tether a wandering soul to a household's memory. The divinest gestures are as much a map for the dead as a prescription for the living. In Yoruba and many West African contexts, the Egungun mask is the ancestor incarnate for a night. A figure in clothes and bead appears where family thinks in terms of names and obligation. Walks with deliberate movement, bends to a stool, and suddenly the relation is enacted rather than only recited. The mask is not a monster, it is a civic office. When the mask form speaks, it performs corrective speech. It names transgressions, it blesses, it instructs young people on remembered duties. The mask's authority is embodied and performative. That is how a community educates the dead's demands without a distant metaphysical court. Shamans and ritual specialists provide different pragmatic help. On the savannah and in the forest towns, a specialist, call them a shaman, a priest, a diviner, can do the work of finding a lost soul. Through trance, song, and ritual action, the specialist locates names, judges when a spirit must be coaxed back, and negotiates with local spirits, river mothers, grove dwellers, bush spirits, who hold a claim on a person. The shaman's drum is not scenic, it is an instrument of navigation. The beat called ancestors opens throats and sometimes frightens away what clings to the corpse. The shaman may sing a dead person's totem name until the name answers. That answer name is then the heather in which the soul is guided. Where Mediterranean world sends a boat, here a river conducts a relation. The current receives libations, carries names, and in lore remembers the shape of a life. Fisherfolk will say the river knows who returns and who will not. Priests will suggest that a clean offering will ease passage. In coastal and riverine communities, Mamiwata and related water spirits may intervene, sometimes demanding respect, sometimes offering aid, sometimes exacting a price. The ritual at the riverbank, leaving perfume, tying clothes, laying out food, are both entreaty and negotiation. The river, like the mask, becomes interlocutor rather than mere backgrounds. Transit is not a private transaction. It is public responsibility. A neglected burial or a skip rite doesn't merely affect the dead in some abstract way. It shows up as illness, failed crops, or quarrel in the town. The community's recognition of a death is thereby preventative measure. It forestalls mischief by giving the dead a form and place. Consequently, funeral specialists are not esoteric artists, but very practical public servants. Diviners who read the soul's needs, embalmers who prepare corpses, mass society elders who decide when the ancestor will dance. Their work preserves the social ledger. So don't neglect the moral grammar. In these worlds, the dead are not primarily metaphysical judges, but relatives with preferences and expectations. Their displeasure is legible as misfortune, their blessing as prosperity. The specialist's technique, naming exact patronymics, reciting the right praise, operates like tending a ledger of favors and debts. Redress is practical. Apologies are performed, obligations are renewed, and the community's memory is reinscribed. The result is durability. Obligations are not legal fictions, but live continuities. a life account is kept not by paper, but by repeated action. So, psychopomps here are not distant fairy operators. They are neighbors, priests, dancers, and waters that remember. The route between worlds is not plotted on a map, but enacted by ritual competence. If you prefer the economy of a single judge or a single fairy, this system will seem messy, but the mess is functional. It makes passage a social achievement, not just a solitary fate. The living through acts repeated and specialists trusted make sure a name does not drown in silence. God and inhabitants, ancestors, elders, masked cults, and nature spirits. In many African worlds, the court of the dead is not up in the clouds or behind a marble bench. It sits in a compound, in a grove, in a masked procession. Ancestors are corporate people. They hold memory, educate by presence, and enforce obligations simply by existing in a social imagination. That sociality is more architecture here. The ancestor is not an abstraction, but a continuing agent. A name spoken at the stool is the opening of a conversation. The ancestor advises through elders, punishes by withdrawing favor, blesses by returning prosperity. Their voice appears in many registers, a dream, the sudden success of a harvest, an elder's admonition. And the people treat those signs as binding testimony. In performance terms, authority is distributed. Elders interpret, priests officiate, mass societies incarnate ancestor speech. The land itself answers. The court is therefore plural, theatrical, and profoundly local. So, picture a consulate night. Men and women seated around a low fire, an ancestral stool in the middle, an elder leaning forward to speak the lineages aloud. Now, when a dispute arises, land growth, marriage slight, a failure to honor a vow, the community convenes ritual. The elder's voice lays out the genealogy. The diviner is called to read omens. A mass society may be summoned to embody the offended ancestor and make the case in public. These performances are neither contrived theater nor private superstition. They are the town's law code in action. The mass appearance is the equivalent of testimony. When the ancestor, through cloth and woods, pronounces judgment, the crowd witnesses and the social ledger is adjusted. In Egungun and similar cults, the masked figure is the ancestor given body. The costume conceals an ordinary person, but reveals a corporate personhood. When the masked dancer enters the plaza, it speaks with a voice older than the speaker. It names crimes, praises the righteous, and remits sins when apology is enacted. The effect is social calibration. Sanctions are public, reconciliation is theatrical, and private resentment is transformed into communal resolution. If an ancestor disapproves of a marriage or a transgression, the mask will not merely scold. It will call for restitutions, arrange public apology, or demand symbolic acts that restore balance. The mask's authority is performative and enforceable because a community accepts it as such. Elders are custodians of precedents. They know which names are important, what promises were made, and how final sacrifices were usually arranged. Their judgment is not written on parchment, but a memory and ritual habits. They call for specific reparative acts. A libation pool at a sacred grove, a period of fasting, the placement of an ancestral stool in a proper orientation. And these acts are understood to alter the social condition. The elders' rulings are enforceable because the social world is tightly woven. Reputation, access to lineage resources, and ritual participation all depend on compliance. So, in short, the court wins because the penalties it can impose are social and material, not merely mythical. Rivers, groves, and sacred stone house beings with strict expectations. Mamivata-type figures, forest guardians, and local tutelary spirits enforce taboos and protect resources. They do not sit behind a desk. They are embodied in prohibition and blessing. If fishermen take the wrong sacrifice, or if hunters violate a grove, the spirit's displeasure is read as sickness, nets that fail, or crops that thin. Rituals of repair, the offering of kola, the replanting of a sacred wood, the temporary closure of a hunting ground, are the remedies the court prescribes. Those remedies have immediate practical consequences for livelihoods. So, compliance is not metaphysically only, it is economic sense. Accusation, ancestral embodiment, remediation, and reintegration. When a wrong is alleged, the town's ritual machinery enact an inquiry. Drums call assemblies, diviners throw kola or palm kernels to probe the cause. Masked elders come to represent the silent ancestors, and the assembly decides on a remedy. That remedy might be a public apology, a blood offering, or the reparation of property. The dramatic presence of the mask lends weight and solemnity to what might otherwise be an ambiguous situation. It turns rumor into ritual facts. These courts teach. Young people watch the mask process and learn the lineage ethics. They learn which names carry weight, which promises cannot be broken, and how to perform apology under public scrutiny. In that sense, the court is a school of memory and discipline. It socializes new generations into the network of obligation by making consequences visible and embodied. The festival then is both punishment and instruction. Spectacle is a civic ecology for transmitting law and ethics. Yet, not all ancestral relations are adjudicatory. Many are prayerful, consoling, and deeply personal. The ancestral stool that sits in a grandmother's hut is a focal point for gratitude. A child will place the first sheaf there. A bride will first offer thanks before cooking for her in-laws. A mourner will return to speak the unsaid words. Those small practices keep the court alive as a source of advice and continuity, not only a disciplinary theater. Ancestors can be capricious, spirits ambivalent. The same masked elder who admonishes one day may bless a different household the next. The logic here is not legal formalism, but relational equilibrium. Obligations ebb and flow, and rituals recalibrate. That uncertainty allows flexibility. Rites change to meet new social realities. And it explains why African ritual cults are resilient. They adapt, absorb new gods, and translate challenges into ritual language rather than collapse under stress. Judgment, reward, and cultural function, kin, memory, and social ecology. Judgment in many African worlds is not a remote pronouncement of a distant deity. It is a continual social accounting performed in public rituals, in whispered remembrances, and in everyday acts that keep the dead folded back into the living's life. The afterlife verdicts show up as harvests that flourish or fail, as health returned or illness begun, as quarrels that escalate or mend. The procedures to repair, reward, or reprove are practical, repeated, and unequivocally social. Ancestors bless those who honor them. A field yields a child is born, luck attends a trader's canoe. Conversely, neglect an ancestor's stool, break a taboo at a sacred grove, or forget a libation, and misfortune arise, fever, store dropped, a well that runs thin. These are not mystical metaphors only. They are interpretive tools for communities that read causality through relation. Rituals, libation, sacrifice, confession serve as the corrective instruments. Pour a cup, name the offender, return a slave price or a goat. The remedy is simple, direct, and communal. And that economy, ritual is governance. It is how societies hold one another accountable when the written law is absent or secondary. Festivals are the great public audits. Igungun, or ancestral festival, is not merely spectacle. It is a ritual balance sheet laid bare before everyone. Mask parade, ancestors incarnate, and the community rehearses its ethic in a vivid register. Praise songs remind people of obligations. Masked figures publicly name transgressions and reconciliates are performed before a watched crowd. The festival converts private duties into public records. In the course of a day, the town reaffirms who belongs where, who owns what, and how grievances may be settled. The pedagogy is obvious. Children learn by watching, and elders teach by enacting consequences. The spectacle is governance by choreography. Ritual repair, furthermore, has legal weight because social life is embodied in ritual position and memory. Restitution, whether payment, apology, or sacrifice, reinstates a person standing in the lineage. A wronged house may demand that a portion of bright wealth be returned, or that a festival host sponsor a public feast. Compliance restores access to ritual privileges, to land, to the honor that conduces advantage in markets and marriages. Thus, ritual economics and social capital go hand in hand. The dead favors are convertible into living benefits, and the living's offerings are tangible investments in social stability. There is also normative pedagogy here. The vividness of ancestral sanction shapes behavior. Mythic tales told at a fireside, the carved faces on stools, and the sharp rebuke of a mask in public are memory technologies. They mark consequences memorable, specific, and transmissible. Communities do not merely set norms. They show what happens when norms are broken. That is why the moral imagination in these worlds tends toward practical remedies rather than abstract punishment. Offenses are repaired by action because action is the social grammar everyone understands. Adaptation and pluralism are central virtues of these systems. African ancestral frameworks have not been static museum pieces. They have absorbed Islam, Christianity, colonial law, and modern economics, and still kept their core logic. A pastor may bless a new ancestral stool, a Muslim family may combine prayers with an offering at a river, regional courts may adjudicate land, while elders hold ritual ceremonies that confirm social legitimacy. This pluralism is not incoherence, but resilience. Ritual languages and religious vocabularies are layered so that the same social needs, repair of relationship, management of grief, education of dispute, can be met through multiple overlapping institutions. Now, economically and politically, the ritual realm also sustains roles and livelihoods. Priests, diviners, mask society elders, and craftspeople who make masks and stools are specialists with recognized authority and remunerative duties. Festivals sustain artisans and traders, offering circulate resources Ritual fines and compensation redistribute wealth in ways that buttress local solidarity. The religious ecology is therefore also civic economy. Rites sustain reputations, redistribute resources, and maintain local patronage networks that matter for governance. And psychologically as well as communally, the effect is consoling and disciplining. Rituals give the bereaved specific tasks. They shape time into manageable intervals. Mourning becomes a sequence of action rather than an endless ache. Public reparations and reconciliations remove grievance from the private sphere where it could fester into vendetta. They convert sorrow into structured action. At the same time, the ancestors' presence fosters continuity. Families feel themselves lodged in a longer story that transcends immediate loss. The dead, in short, are not exiled but incorporated into the ongoing life of the group. So, these systems run on remembered debts and return favors. Feed the ancestors and they feed you. Neglect them, and the scarcity follows. The moral economy is reciprocal rather than punitive. What the living owe the dead is care and memory. What the ancestors return is social harmony, fertility, and protection. Rituals are the transfer mechanisms in that economy. They are small, repeatable acts. Pouring palm wine, sweeping a shrine, dancing in mass clothes. That keep society functional.